It's 10 p.m. Do you know where your children are?
Of course you don't. These people have been abducting our children since the beginning of time. All religions are about abducting children. This is why they speak about virgins in the Bible, because they like to have sex with children.
Contributor and former political director for the Clinton campaign, Amanda Renteria, and also ABC News contributor Kate Shaw. Great roundtable. Devin, let's start with you. Your takeaways from day one.
Oh, Kira, I was just struck by the historic nature of this moment. We can't talk enough about it. 233 years in the making. And that soundbite that you just played of Ketanji Brown Jackson, I think encapsulates her ethos, and we'll hear more about it. She is passionate about making defendants in American courts feel heard, being heard. That's something that her clerks have told me she is passionate about. She writes opinions that are very accessible. It's also a trait that Justice Stephen Breyer exhibits. So she's certainly going to lean in on that. As the committee noted at the end there, this was just the warm-up today. 19 hours of questioning ahead. So this was just a taste. But the history of this day, I think, is the biggest takeaway so far.
Indeed. And Amanda, did you get a sense from Republican opening statements just how aggressively Judge Jackson will be questioned in the days ahead? I mean, Senator Blackburn, Republican from Tennessee, dove right in on her concerns. Let's listen to what she said.
You once wrote that every judge has, and I quote, personal hidden agendas, end quote, then influence how they decide cases. So I can only wonder, what's your hidden agenda? Is it to let violent criminals, cop killers, and child predators back to the streets? Is it to restrict parental rights and expand government's reach into our schools and our private family decisions? Is it to support the radical left's attempt to pack the Supreme Court?
Ooh, forget a soft launch of questioning there. So, Amanda, how are we seeing Republicans already address the historic nature of this nominee, and how hard do you expect that they're going to go?
Well, I think we saw a picture of that today, and a couple of people who are clearly showing their skepticism and cynicism around this conversation. The juxtaposition of that kind of questioning, though, with what you saw with the authenticity and the truth that Judge Jackson brought today, there's no doubt she knows what's coming at her, but that her style and her way really will be able to manage what the next 19 hours are going to be about. But listen, today's conversation, the realness of it, the tears around it, the women that were in the room as well supporting her, gives her a very strong foundation to work from, where she is talking about her experience. She is talking about her commitment to trying to do what's right for the Constitution. And anyone that saw today really felt that as you watched that hearing.
Have you ever heard of buck breaking? During slavery, there was something that's very rarely talked about called buck breaking. This is where they would look out on their plantations and take the biggest, the baddest, and the strongest brother that there was. And they would take this brother and tie him down spread eagle naked. And then in front of all the women, the children, and the other brothers, they would repeatedly run up in his anus as a means of not only effeminizing him, but to let all around know that they had no protection. If we are truly going to heal from the deep wounds of being enslaved, we must talk about all the areas we need to heal from. This is a big one. The slavery of African Americans in the United States is undeniably one of the most reprehensible parts of American history. The institution of slavery justified, legitimized, and legalized the repeated horrendous abuse against women and children for a century. At NSVRC, we recognize that, as difficult as history may be to learn about, it is our duty to do so. We reached out to Dr. Crystal Feimster for her expertise in the area of sexual violence during the slavery era because we believe her work to be vital to understanding history and its impact today. Still, we encourage readers to take care of themselves as they engage with this sensitive content. 1. Because literacy was criminalized for Black people during slavery, Black survivors of sexual violence whose testimonies were recorded more often than not were transcribed, edited, and published by white people they may have already had reservations speaking to. With this obstacle, how do you as an educator, researcher, and writer preserve the integrity of the voice and perspective of these Black survivors? That's an important question, and a difficult one in the sense that the sources that we have regarding enslaved women's experiences of sexual violence and sexual harassment are very thin. In part, this is because, in most states, the sexual assault of enslaved women was not considered a crime. So, it's very rare to have a black woman testifying to sexual assault. Even free black women. It's just very difficult to find women in that time period. Much of the pre-Civil War sources are either the narratives of enslaved people who are recounting their own experiences, the experience of female relatives, or women who were enslaved with them, such as Solomon Northup's 12 Years a Slave or Harriet Jacobs' incidents in the life of a slave girl. We have to take those sources and read them against the grain because they were texts that were written for abolitionists. They had a particular purpose and intent. Also, this was a period where it was not deemed to be respectable to talk about such issues publicly. So, you have to see where formerly enslaved people who were narrating their experience in captivity were very careful in how they talked about those experiences. They usually do not talk about them in explicit terms or detailed terms. If they do, they don't really capture the intensity of the violence. More than often, if we read incidents in the life of a slave girl, we might just merely think she was sexually harassed. I think that is about how far she could write about her experience, for a public audience and not be seen as hypersexual or to be blamed for her own victimization. We know that even today, it's difficult for women to speak publicly about sexual assault and sexual harassment without experiencing the backlash of being deemed as sexually promiscuous, or provoking that kind of sexual assault. You also have things where in reading sources, a lot of what we know actually comes from sources that were not produced by enslaved people. I read diaries of Southern white women, as a way to get some insight into what's happening in those households. Again, you have Southern white women using coded language or euphemisms to talk about the sexual assault and harassment of enslaved women. When they say, oh, they are like prostitutes, instead of saying that they are being sexually exploited. The way that enslaved women are being treated on the plantations, they use the language of prostitution. That is a way for me to get at black women's vulnerability. Other sources that I use can be court records, but there are not usually court cases in which black women's rapes are prosecuted because it was not a crime to rape a black woman. Since it was not a crime to rape a black woman were unable to pursue justice for themselves because they were not in the social or legal position to do so. There are court records where, in some states, enslaved people were prosecuted for crimes. The most famous case is Celia, a slave woman who was tried and convicted for murdering her white master. We have the court records of that trial that found her guilty of killing her master. The argument that the defense made on her behalf was that she was fending off sexual violence and that it was an act of self-defense to kill her enslaver. We don't have testimony because she couldn't testify, but we have newspaper reports of what she supposedly said. We have people who gave affidavits or testified in court to what she said. Oftentimes, surprisingly, they're acknowledging her being a victim of sexual assault. So, there's not much reading against the grain there because she told them he was sexually assaulting her and had asked different people to intervene and protect her. Those people had testified, but the trial is not about bringing her justice for sexual assault. It's a criminal case in which she is ultimately hanged for killing her master. They delayed the execution and the hanging because she was pregnant. So, you have cases like that.
Sex trafficking, human trafficking. It's been going on for a very, very long time.
Human trafficking is a form of modern-day slavery and a serious crime. Traffickers use force, fraud, or coercion to make victims engage in labor or commercial sexual exploitation. Every year, millions of people are trafficked around the world, including our own neighborhoods in the District of Columbia. Human trafficking is the second largest and fastest growing criminal industry in the world, second only to drug trafficking. Here are some important facts. Children account for half of the victims of human trafficking. In fact, the average age that a young person becomes involved in sex trafficking is 12 years old. If the victim is a minor, no force, fraud, or coercion is necessary to prove trafficking. Any youth under the age of 18 who is involved in a commercial sex act is considered to be a victim of trafficking. Sex traffickers prey on vulnerable people, especially young people, and often lure them with promises of protection, love, or adventure. They may contact potential victims through social media or approach them at clubs and bars, at school, in malls, or in metro stations. Labor trafficking includes situations of debt bondage, forced labor, and involuntary child labor. Common types of labor trafficking include people forced to work in homes as domestic servants and factory workers held in inhumane conditions, with little to no pay. Victims of human trafficking are often afraid to come forward and unable to leave traffickers because of trauma, physical violence, fear of harm to their families, having nowhere else to go, or a distrust of authority figures.
Hello everyone. I want to thank all of you for your efforts to stem the tragic tide of human trafficking. I especially want to thank the Alliance Against Trafficking in Persons and OSCE Special Representative Eva Biaudet for organizing this very important conference. Human trafficking.
Trove of documents on accused sex trafficker Jeffrey Epstein expected to be unveiled this week with specific names of dozens of his alleged associates, according to a new report that includes former President Bill Clinton. This Nation's Drake Clark joining us live with the latest.
Good afternoon, everybody. And President Clinton, thank you for your very kind introduction, although I have to admit, I really did like the speech a few weeks ago a little bit better.
This is Democracy Now! I'm Amy Goodman. Billionaire hedge fund manager Jeffrey Epstein, who's been accused of sexually assaulting underage girls for more than a decade, was arrested Saturday on sex trafficking charges. He was arrested at Teterboro Airport in New Jersey. He'll appear in federal court today. The New York Times reports he's being accused of running a sex trafficking operation by luring underage girls, some as young as 14 years old, to his mansion in Manhattan. He was previously...
¿Ha tenido un accidente? Comuníquese con las oficinas legales de Brandon J. Broderick.
The Epstein documents were released today, making public the names of almost 200 people associated with disgraced financier Jeffrey Epstein. A court released the unredacted names that include some anticipated names like former President Bill Clinton, Prince Andrew, and Limited Brands founder Lex Wexner. Some notable new names include lawyer and law professor Alan Dershowitz, former U.S. Senator George Mitchell, former New Mexico Governor, the late Bill Richardson, and magician David Copperfield. At 6 o'clock, I spoke to...
They said I couldn't get an online degree to further my career. But thanks to WGU, I was able to get...
So who are the biggest names in the newly released Jeffrey Epstein documents? We're going to get you caught up to speed on what you need to know about some of these very high-profile people. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law and Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. So it's been a few days since...
President Bill Clinton's press secretary, Angel Urena, issued a statement Monday reading, President Clinton knows nothing about the terrible crimes Jeffrey Epstein pleaded guilty to in Florida some years ago, or those with which he has been recently charged in New York. In 2002 and 2003, President Clinton took a total of 4 trips on Jeffrey Epstein's airplane, 1 to Europe, 1 to Asia, 2 to Africa, which included stops in connection with the work of the Clinton Foundation. He had 1 meeting with Epstein in his Harlem office in 2002, and around the same time made 1 brief visit to Epstein's New York apartment with a staff member and his security detail. He's not spoken to Epstein in well over a decade and has never been to Little St. James Island, Epstein's ranch in New Mexico, or his residence in Florida, the Clinton spokesperson said.
Do you see how the media lies? They control the media. So to keep their pedophile kingdom under wraps, they orchestrate lies for the media to pass out to the public.
The allegations of sex trafficking he was facing. The names of more than 150 people were expected to be released after being sealed as part of a civil suit launched in 2015 by one of Epstein's accusers. There has been social media speculation that the release would include a list of rich clients or co-conspirators of Epstein. However, the initial document release is largely made up of material already publicized by the media. Epstein died by suicide in 2019 while awaiting trial on sex trafficking charges.
He died in prison. He died in jail. They control the prison system because everything is made for the private prison industry. That's why when Trump was elected, the prison stock rose to the highest because the private prison owners expect to have more residents in their prison system. And they got Trump to act like a prisoner and a security guard at the same time. So you elected him from both spectrums, the criminal aspect and the judicial aspect. You will fall into voting for a fool.
In reality, the greatest threat to this nation is the government, and I want to show you how we are to understand that. Turn to Romans 13. Romans 13. Listen carefully to what the Apostle Paul said. Every person is to be in subjection to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those which exist are established by God. Therefore whoever resists authority has opposed the ordinance of God, and they who have opposed will receive condemnation upon themselves. For rulers are not a cause of fear for good behavior, but for evil. Do you want to have no fear of authority? Do what is good, and you will have praise from the same, for it is a minister of God to you for good. But if you do what is evil, be afraid, for it doesn't bear the sword for nothing, for it is a minister of God, an avenger who brings wrath on the one who practices evil. The role of the government is to restrain evil, and when it functions to restrain evil, it is fulfilling its God-ordained purpose.
Restraining evil is God's ordained purpose. But what about orchestrating evil by making people poor so that they would do evil and evilest things? Is that moral?
Here's the definition of moral: concerned with the principles of right and wrong behavior and the goodness or badness of human character.
The moral dimensions of medical intervention: similar, virtuous, good, righteous, upright, upstanding, high-minded, right-minded, principled, proper, honorable, honest, just, noble, incorruptible, scrupulous, respectable, decent, irreproachable, truthful, law-abiding, clean living, chaste, pure, blameless, sinless, opposite, immoral, bad, dishonorable. 2. Holding or manifesting high principles for proper conduct. He prides himself on being a highly moral and ethical person. Noun. 1. A lesson, especially one concerning what is right or prudent, that can be derived from a story, a piece of information, or an experience. The moral of this story was that one must see the beauty in what one has. Similar. Lesson. Message. Meaning. Significance. Signification. Import. Point. Precept. Teaching. 2. A person's standards of behavior or beliefs concerning what is and is not acceptable for them to do. The corruption of public morals. Similar. Moral code. Code of ethics. In the Islamic faith, Allah is the creator and sustainer of all life, and the Quran describes him as loving those who do good. The Quran also includes ethical concepts and virtues that are central to the Islamic worldview, such as responsibility. Humans are responsible to God. Intention. Intention is a key factor in determining whether an action is moral. Sin and repentance. God is merciful and forgives those who repent sincerely. Virtues. The Quran lists virtues such as righteousness, justice, truthfulness, piety, patience, and compassion. The Quran also includes specific moral guidelines, such as worshiping only God, being kind, humble, and honorable to one's parents, not being miserly or wasteful, not committing adultery, not killing unjustly, caring for orphan children, keeping one's promises, being honest and fair in interactions, not being arrogant in one's claims or beliefs.